You know, in the field of forensic psychiatry, there is no question more disturbing, more fundamentally chilling than this. How could a parent kill their own child? It's an act that just seems to fly in the face of nature itself. Today, we're going to use the tragic case of Andrea Yates to try and understand the psychology behind this truly unthinkable crime. So here's how we're going to approach this. First, we have to confront the shocking reality of this crime. Then, we'll bring in a really key forensic framework that helps make sense of it all. After that, we're doing a deep dive into the Andrea Yates case, her incredibly complex legal battles, and what her story reveals when you compare it to other very different patterns of filicide. Every single time a story like this appears in the news, we're all forced to ask ourselves the same horrifying question. How could a parent possibly kill their own children? I mean, the question itself just feels wrong, doesn't it? It goes against our most basic instinct to protect our young. And yet, this isn't some rare anomaly. It's a tragedy that happens with truly unsettling regularity. It's easy to think of these as shocking one-off events, but when you look at the data, the story it tells is, well, it's horrifying. Here in the US, about 500 children are killed by a parent every single year, and forensic experts are pretty sure that number is an undercount because these crimes can sometimes be really hard to detect. And it's events like the recent mass killing in Shreveport that force us to move beyond just shock and into actual clinical analysis. These are often called family annihilation cases, where a parent, usually the father, kills the entire family. It's crucial to understand this pattern, because as we're about to see, it stands in stark contrast to cases like Andrea Yates's. Okay, so to get from that feeling of horror to actual clinical understanding, you need a framework, and the most widely used system in forensic psychiatry comes from Dr. Philip Resnick. Back in 1969, he gave experts the language to finally categorize and analyze these terrible acts. Dr. Resnick broke it down into 5 primary motives. They range from things like an accidental death from abuse, all the way to spousal revenge, where the child is tragically used as a weapon against a partner. But for the Andrea Yates case, the one we're really focusing on, 2 of these categories are absolutely essential to understand: altruistic and acutely psychotic filicide. So let's start with altruistic filicide. This is where the logic becomes profoundly distorted. The parent's mental illness convinces them that killing their child is actually an act of love. It's a way to save them from some perceived terrible fate or to relieve them of suffering. In their broken mind, it's not murder, it's a mercy killing. And then you have acutely psychotic filicide. Here, the parent's connection to reality has completely snapped. The killing isn't driven by any twisted logic of love or mercy. It's driven by the psychosis itself, by overpowering hallucinations or delusions that are commanding the parent to act. These 2 motives, the altruistic and the acutely psychotic, well, they converge in the most tragic way imaginable in the case of Andrea Yates, which is easily one of the most wrenching and misunderstood filicide cases in modern American history. When you look at this timeline, you're not just seeing a list of events. You're watching a catastrophe unfold in slow motion. Andrea Yates wasn't some monster who just appeared overnight. She was a woman in the absolute grip of a severe postpartum psychosis, and she had a clear history of hospitalizations, diagnosed psychotic episodes, and even a suicide attempt. The warning signs, they were all there. When the police arrived at her house on that horrific day in June of 2001, Andrea was calm. She was direct. She confessed immediately. But the reason why she did it wasn't rooted in reality at all. It was born from a profound and absolutely terrifying delusion. And right here, this is where we see exactly how those 2 motives just crashed into each other. Her belief that Satan was literally inside of her, that was a product of her acutely psychotic state, a complete and total break from reality. And then that delusion fueled her altruistic motive, the chillingly logical conclusion inside her psychotic mind that the only way to save her children from an eternity in hell was to kill them while they were still innocent enough to go to heaven. So with her confession on the table, the central question for the legal system was never if she'd killed her children. The entire case, the whole legal battle, hinged on a much more complex question. In her state of mind, could she actually be held criminally responsible for her actions? Her first trial really centered on a very fine but absolutely critical legal distinction. The defense, which actually had Dr. Resnick testify, argued that because of her psychosis, Andrea did not know her actions were morally wrong. But the prosecution countered that even if she was mentally ill, she understood her actions were legally wrong, that she knew she was breaking the law. And in that first trial, the jury sided with the prosecution. They came back in less than 4 hours and found her guilty of capital murder. she was sentenced to life in prison. But that verdict, that would not be the final word in her case, not by a long shot. So her conviction was overturned on a technicality. It turned out the prosecution's expert witness had given some erroneous testimony. She was retried in 2006, and a new jury heard all the same evidence, but as their foreman said, they came to a starkly different conclusion. Yeah, that second jury came to a profoundly different conclusion. They found Andrea Yates not guilty by reason of insanity. And what that verdict really was an acknowledgement of the overwhelming power of her mental illness. So instead of a prison cell, she was committed to a state mental hospital for treatment. The Andrea Yates case gives us a very clear profile of a psychosis-driven maternal filicide. So now, let's contrast that with the case we mentioned earlier, Shamar Elkins. By putting them side by side, we can really see how these different motives create very distinct and often gendered criminal profiles, and the contrasts are just stark. Maternal filicide driven by psychosis, like in the Yates case, often involves methods like drowning, with the violence focused only on the children. But paternal filicide, that is much more commonly driven by spousal revenge. This pattern, which experts call family annihilation, often involves guns. It includes the murder of the spouse, and it very frequently ends with the father's suicide. Look, at the end of the day, the reason to study these horrific cases is for one reason: prevention. Understanding the different patterns, the postpartum psychosis that drove Andrea Yates versus the vengeful control in cases of family annihilation. That is the first crucial step toward intervention. It helps us recognize the distinct warning signs. So the final question really is for all of us. Now that we understand the why, what are we going to do to prevent it?